Cool. All right, so my thought for the call here is to just sort of share some reflections from our time together at GOAT, and specifically, Ian, I'm really excited that you're on. I'm excited to talk a little bit about digital signatures and where we could be thinking about integrating digital signatures. Hey, Aaron, welcome. So my sense is that could be, the bulk of our conversation together. I was also thinking, we could be sharing a little bit. The other big conversation, and I think this is pertinent for Dagan as well, is around how we're building sort of like tooling for people to be integrating with remote sensing. So those are the two themes I felt like emerged for our work plans super clearly, is like, how do we integrate digital signing into the various different applications people are building, and sort of data interoperability, and sort of connecting into the remote sensing pipelines for various different teams. So those are three topics. I'm most excited to talk about digital signing.
That's like I said, I'm interested to hear. I don't know. You said you guys have these kind of regularly, and I thought I'd just pop in and see what kind of stuff you guys get into. The Friday was good. I wish I could have stayed for Saturday. And thanks again, Giselle, for the presentation there on what you guys have been doing for remote sensing. It's good to see you're running into some of the same sort of problems we run into in terms of, bad remote sensing data, because half the battle is fighting through the bad remote sensing data in terms of misregistered and whatnot. I don't know if I have any specific questions on the signature side, but I guess I'm curious to where you see it fitting in, the remote sensing piece fitting in there. We have a pipeline that, we can make it as lean as, this pipeline will, pull this remote sensing data down from a primary source and process it and analyze it and, produce a summarized result verifying something, tillage or cover crop stuff. But then in terms of going to the level of making it a signed thing, then I would feel like you would actually need to make the digital asset and have it live somewhere. Mm-hmm. But that's the part that I'm less familiar with and kind of interested how you guys would see that happening.
Yeah, cool. Aaron, would you like to speak to that? And or use, I think there's a cool opportunity for this conversation to happen here.
Hi, Ian. So your question is like, where does the digital asset live? Maybe, can you rephrase your question? Because I'm not really sure what the...
Sure. I guess where I was going is that from the standpoint of sort of reproducibility, we can have a version of GIPS and Optus that will, given a set of remote sensing data that exists, pull that in, process it, and make a digital asset. Or it can just be that version of the software could be run over and over again, so long as the input remote sensing data that it depends on is still accessible. So that's where I thought that it would, for actually like integrating into any sort of ledger, I would think you would want to have an actual artifact. It would be great if it was reproducible forever, but I guess that would mean instead you have to have the original source data around forever. But I don't know much about integrating with blockchain, so
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways it could look depending on what sort of guarantees you want to have. Um, so regarding the source data, um, you could do a cryptographic hash of the source data, and you could also do a hash of the algorithm you're running if it ran sort of in a containerized environment. Um, so, and that's sort of the basic model that I've been thinking of is you have a bunch of images or whatever other data you collected, you have the hashes of those. If you can run, you have the hash of the Docker container, and then you have the hash of the result, and that kind of describes what is like, yeah, what is the input you need in order to make it reproducible. And if you don't still have that source input, the algorithms, you lose that source input. I guess you can still run it again and you can see if you get the same results, but you at least know that that something may have changed if you can't retrieve those originals. But there's many levels on which people are thinking about making these guarantees. Like one level is just simply, um, you know, you have a software package that just signs the end result, and you don't know if you can reproduce it, but we just trust you. Um, and then Yeah, and then you can go all the way down the line of tracking all of your inputs, saving them, or at least saving the hashes of them. Yeah,
Right. So maybe it's helpful. We sort of think of it as a continuum, like sort of a trust continuum, and how to what's the granularity of an audit that you would like. And I think in the future that will depend on what the type of agreement or ecosystem service credit or the value of the financial instrument or sort of like, or the research needs, what those are. And in some cases you need a lot of uh, reproducibility and a lot of detail. And so we might want to have pipelines that can be fully signed, sort of like every, and have the data sort of archived forever, so that it could be reproduced. And in other cases, you just want the end, the output to be signed, right? And so I think it's more use case dependent. And I think right now what I'm interested in is understanding, how, like, if and how it makes sense to sort of like, obviously the desirable thing is to have signature capability everywhere and have, immutable storage options everywhere. But what's doable is probably not what's desirable. And so just sort of calibrating in our expectations on sort of like a minimum viable level of signature that makes sense for some clear use cases that are exciting with an open team, so that we can just kind of focus on those, and then we can work on building, the rest of the, what might be desirable down the road as, later on.
yeah, I guess that's kind of where I was going. Is I didn't know if you guys had already zeroed in on that level of reproducibility and documentation. I guess that's what I think of. Like the signature trail is like a documentation of everything, and I guess I didn't know if you had already zeroed in on that level of that was required for
our method to determine that right now, that is essentially to do a little bit of a design session with people who would like to have the audit trail, and just to determine what level of rigor is needed for that particular set of groups. So it's sort of like we need to have a case study pilot and then determine in that context what the level is, and then sort of build accordingly. And our thesis is, if we do that 20 times or whatever, we end up seeing the pattern of need, and we can design the tools accordingly. And to be honest, I don't know in that continuum between what's desirable in terms of like everything being, signable and options for immutability of data to just the output, I kind of don't know. I actually think where even just the output being signable is a quantum leap. So
Yeah.
probably that's enough to do initial pilot work. You know what I mean?
What like the way that I've been thinking about it is that I think that the like what Gregory's saying, the output being signable is a big leap. I really think the more important thing, the signatures is a part of it, but it goes together with having some common language, some common data schemes for claims. So if you're signing something, what is the nature of what you're signing? And I think the way I'm imagining contracts working is that at some level, somebody signed a document where it basically says, using such and such algorithm, we have determined that there was an increase in the above ground biomass between 2017 and 2018 of, this percent or this many tons, and a claim sort of looks like that. And having the language for claims being such that, you can spit out your software, somebody else's can just spit out a claim that looks like that, can be understood by other systems. And then you can link to that, like, oh, and these are the, this is the audit trail of the calculations. But the more important thing, I think, is the interoperability and then a high level signature on the output. That's my guess.
Right. That the lower level, or like the detailed, the super detailed level of signatures, like within a pipeline, is something we could predict might be necessary in the future as this sort of gets adopted, in order to be able to generate more and more understanding of uncertainty, essentially. But that right now, probably it's just the output, as Aaron's saying. But so Aaron, do you want to, or do people have questions or reflections around sort of what I'm hearing Aaron say is reframing from what's into, maybe it's worth having a conversation about what a standard claim looks like.
I mean, I could get it.
By everybody.
I could get into that. I did a bit of initial design on that, but I would like to just, see if you have any questions or comments before we move into that.
I mean, I think that sounds good, and I guess I don't know if you guys are already working with Ori folks or someone who would be able to better answer those sort of what's required questions.
Yeah, actually, I had a really great conversation with Jason from Nori about, actually they don't currently have digital signing, which means that they don't currently have low-cost audit. Like, you have to call up CSU and have them basically like send an Excel export of the comp tool in order to run an audit of a particular place. So they've sort of they're leapfrogging over this problem, but very interested and motivated if we can help solve it. And they have some really good, I think they can do good guidance on, and I also had conversation with Comet and Cool Farm about like where signing might be, like at what point you sign, sort of, and what the claim looks like that they're using, like what is the actual detail. But in some ways, I don't think they're designing it for this sort of like interoperable ecosystem that they're desirous of it, but they haven't currently been pointing their design attention in that way. So I don't know if that's helpful context, but.
I wanted to clarify, is this something that is like informing the design of the Regen SDK?
Yeah,
that's
definitely
how you'd interface to the actual blockchain and getting this there.
Yeah, so maybe I can say a little bit about what I imagine the features of the Regen kind of SDK being. First of all, I think it's important for us to target ubiquity, platform ubiquity, so that you can drop it in any sort of existing application, and doing it in a low enough level language that then we can write bindings. So the idea would be that this is accessible from any language, and that you can, the base level capability is support for kind of managing keys on a device. So there'd be some particular functionality that's enabled on devices that have their own like secure enclave, like iPhones, Androids, Macs have those secure enclaves now. So managing device keys and doing this sort of like this multi-factor kind of signing that we're setting up on Regen Ledger, and then you'd be able to sort of do a signature on your device and then push it up to Regen Ledger or another ledger that implemented this protocol that was based on the sort of same Cosmos SDK tools that we're using. It would have that basic level, and then it would have I'm imagining it has some domain model for ecological claims that allows you to kind of take whatever data you have within your system and then create an entity for an ecological claim that's sort of in this language that we kind of generate together, and then you can create that entity, and you can either like publish it on an endpoint so that somebody could hit your service and just retrieve these claims in this format, or you could push it up to a blockchain and store it there. And the claims entities would be designed in a way that they have sort of a hash that's dependent on the data in the claim, not just like the serialization. You can just take a hash of JSON, but that you want to have, then it's dependent on all the white space you have in your JSON and everything. Is some technical details. But anyway, the idea is that you have both the key management and signing capabilities, and you have the domain entities for creating these claims that could be very specific, like to a limited number of claims we decide on. It could be more generic in that you could have any number of sort of schemas that are captured in the system that can be generated and signed. So does that give a rough overview, and are there any questions on that? If there's something I said that didn't make sense, definitely ask.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I think just initial thought is that something like this could be important for, we have, I think we're going to need to sign things and have it published at some point. I guess I feel like that's in the world of digital assets, fraud is too easy in some cases, and I think that would help us in terms of ensuring that data we produce, if we're producing data and licensing it to people, then it can't end up somewhere else down the line. It's having some degree of knowledge. I guess is that something where if you have a signature registered with a Regen Ledger or whatever, if it propagates further down the line, are you aware of that? Like,
what is an example case? Like, give me like a concrete case.
If someone else, I guess, if that data gets rolled into another contract down the line, does everyone would if we produce the asset, sign it, and it goes in as the contract A, and then the person who is on the other end of contract A goes and makes another contract, would we be aware of the parties involved in the next contract?
If they do it publicly on Regen Ledger or another like public ledger, maybe a zone connected to Regen Ledger, yeah, you could track it. If there's some way they're doing that, backdoor kind of deal, no, like if they're not hiding information, then yeah, you would see that. I mean, I'm not sure if this is kind of the use case you're thinking of, but one thing we're imagining is that somebody may go and get an assessment, a certification and then the organization that's like signing the claim would put that up on the ledger, and then they might get in a contract to sort of be paid for something they've done, and then they would reference that in, like, the contract would maybe be, if there is a like verification body that is certified to issue this type of verifications, there would need to be some sort of way that your organization or whoever is authorized, then the contract would say, it would look in the database of claims that's on the ledger, and if that claim exists, then that would trigger the contract. That could be created either before or after you kind of sign the verification claim. Is that kind of answer? And
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's I guess it falls under the one more piece of the puzzle to try and put together a system where someone's not going to be out there be able to make a claim and say, oh, Dagan has certified that this person is, let's say they're doing conventional tillage, and someone says, oh, Dagan said they're doing conventional tillage, and we'd say, well, show us the hash, essentially.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, you would, and there's a way that you could have some of the data be public and some of the data be private. Like, you could store the hash of the data on the ledger, but not actually the whole claim. And so then somebody would say, well, I have a certificate and it was dated in such and such a day, and then they could say, okay, well, this is the hash of it, and then send a request to Dagan's endpoint, and if you can retrieve that document, the hash verifies. Maybe there's some signatures stored in the chain. The reason for storing signatures on the chain is that it lets you keep a sequence counter, so you can make sure that they were done at the time. Like, you can do some time tracking of when signatures were done as well. You could go say, oh, here are the signatures, here's the hash, here's the document. Okay, you have the claim. Or they could even store a copy of it themselves. And as long as you see that the signature corresponds to your public key, then they also know that you signed it. So they don't even actually need to talk to you. You could give them like the certificate. And with the ledger, another thing that we've thought of, which will require some thought, like for on ledger contracts, we could set up some mechanism where, like, if you say that you're issuing these certificates, but if somebody uses it for a contract, then you get some sort of like fee. Like, you could say, well, like, you could postpone your payment until somebody actually receives a reward, for instance. And the ledger could set up. Now, it'd be hard to make it so that works with like off ledger contracts. People are doing sort of backdoor deals, but at least for things that are on the ledger, we could say, oh yeah, like, this contract has a condition that we're going to withdraw this money and pay it to Dagan because they signed it. So there's different ways you can set up like usage agreements that we've thought of.
Right. There's a benefit. There's a benefit for all of us to use the public ledger to execute contracts, because it allows us to do these sort of like microservice transactional payments, so that you can program that. So it is gonna, as Aaron's saying, it's gonna require some attention to how it gets architected, but we've sort of been thinking it through, and it's totally doable. Although if people are just using the hash, as he's saying, to do a quick verification of yes, and then they're doing an offline contract, obviously the offline contract would need to have that kind of attribute, right? You'd need, in the offline world, you'd need to make that kind of conditional use agreement explicit, which is also doable. People do that all the time. So
yeah, it's a contract, but
yeah.
Yeah.
But it is possible to automate it, which I think is quite cool, because it enables potentially us to scale the usage of models or data sets to many users. As long as the contract is taking place on Regen Ledger, we can build business models around sort of like royalties almost, that every time it gets used, the people who are responsible for building it get a payment. That's kind of the vision. That's the hope, is that we can achieve that kind of thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think
Paul.
it'd be great to get a full kind of flow of of all this, and like be able to see where it's being signed. And It's like a user flow, but for the developers and how it's going to get designed and implemented.
Well, what if we throw up a whiteboard here?
Yeah, if we can do that.
Okay. Let's see. I haven't used this whiteboard so much, but let's give it a try. All right. Actually, we use Mural for this. Should we throw up a mural?
Yeah, throw up a mural.
Because then that's persistent.
Cool.
Do you want me to try to do that, Aaron?
I'm trying to get in there. I think I can do it.
Okay.
Create a new mural, blank mural. There we go. And then I'll send a link in the Zoom chat, everyone.
Will, just so you know, I muted you in case you were trying to talk because there was lots of background noise. So if you, not you, Will Zoll, yeah. Will Gardner.
Oh. Okay.
So if you've been trying to talk, Will Gardner, we haven't been hearing you, but we would love you to share if you, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, sorry. Did I just unmute myself? Sorry, I didn't realize I was, I assumed that when I joined I was muted. So, my bad.
We can hear you now, and it's great. Yeah, no worries. We can
Okay.
hear wind or something.
Yeah, no, I've just been soaking it all in and, you know, listening to you guys. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. So I have this mural in the chat, in Zoom chat. You'll find it there. So maybe let's, Paul, do you have some questions that we could use as a starting point for kind of mapping this out?
Well, I liked, could we go in the context of Regen integrating? Because that kind of is a good use case or an example.
Okay, so let me draw a box and we'll call this the farm, maybe. Farm. Okay, there's our farm. And there's
Is everybody seeing the mural?
How do I spell it? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, there's the farm and there's Dagon.
Sure.
And then there's, I guess we have to have some entity that's paying the farmer, like the who's going to pay the farmer?
Is that like the contract?
Why don't we let Ian actually narrate
Go for
it. A use case in which Dagon is being used for whatever it is instead of sort of like our use case, because I think digital signatures are more ubiquitously useful than just sort of like execution of an ecological contract.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, Ian, maybe if you could. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's the thing is that in the end, the Dagon's data products would be a verification asset for an ecological contract. So I guess I'd say no. It's pretty much. It sounds like it's in the same use case ballpark, and I'm just yeah. In terms of that would be some farmer signs up with some sort of program, and currently a lot of programs, if a farmer is participating, they are either A, they're just reporting the data themselves, or B, there's manual drive out to the farm verifications. So being able to provide the lower cost verification seems like a high value item in terms of scaling up contracts of that nature. Funny note on the mural is I'm seeing kind of like, oh, there's a zoom thing here. Okay, I haven't used the mural much. There we go.
You can zoom in and out. I just was throwing up, some specific like GIPs and Optus.
Yep.
We could name this data asset something specific, like like verification of no-till or something like that.
Yeah. It's a no-till verification, or there's or I guess another thing could be for a DNDC output, there could be a estimate of the carbon sequestered.
Maybe both. Maybe there's sort of like, it's a dual program or something. So we've got
Right.
DNDC, no-till verification, DNDC carbon estimate.
And the claim, maybe we should.
And then there's a
claim from the client, right?
there's a claim being made by Dagan, I think.
By Dagan.
I guess.
Nope.
Yeah, I would see Dagan's role as verifying a claim. So,
Okay.
the farmer or to go to, the farmer or the supply chain for a particular product is the farmer implicitly enrolled by that supply chain. And then it would be verifying, either for an individual farmer enrolled in a program, or if a larger organization enrolls many farmers.
Would it be helpful to throw in a few specifics around claims? Because we did start talking about the claim kind of design.
Sure.
So the way I'm imagining a claim, and this comes from, I've shared these links before, but I'll share them again, both semantic sensor network ontology, this sort of like mental model, and it also comes from OBO. They have a similar sort of thing. So I'll throw these out there.
I'm just rearranging this so that it's sort of in the same.
The idea is that we have a claim, and a claim in this model, a claim would say who signed claim. You'd say like what is the polygon it applies to? What is the observable property? What is the measurement result?
And is there like also like where is the evidence of the result?
Yeah, that could also be there. Like, but the basics are just like that would be like an additional property. But like you could, an example here with this would be observable property. It could be I could think like forest cover is a good one, and then the measurement result could be like percentage cover. For no-till, there'd sort of be a different type of claim, which is like the claim is that like who signed the claim, what is the polygon that applies to. So this is sort of like an observation claim. I think that's sort of the most generic one. But in this case, like a no-till claim would be would actually be an aggregation of a bunch of claims over the period of this season that there was no observations where like the cover had dropped below a certain threshold that indicated tilling or something like that. That like the land composition lacked the land. Like in order to generate a counterclaim, I think you would compose that of a number of subclaims that say for each image that we analyzed, this is the way.
Oops, we lost Aaron.
We lost Aaron.
I wasn't sure if when that happened last time it was my end or his end.
Well, so is what he's making a supposition that we would need to sign. This is kind of for Ian and Giselle.
Yeah.
Would we need to sign each, or just sort of like you'd run a time series and you'd reference the data, and at the end you'd make a single signature that says basically over this time series there was no, crop cover was observed consistently within the parameters of our.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
that the claim would be verified by by a methodology that will be including a time series, and it will depend on the claim type, but it's like when you finally you link all this to a big chain of algorithms that work together and verify something. And so the output is like very clear, very robust.
Unambiguous.
But yes, and unambiguous. It's not like you do it. So when we're talking about standardizing claims, what comes to my mind is that for certain indicators or for certain things that we want to verify, we will have different times of interest for doing the analysis. So if we want to verify changes in 1 year, depends on what are we verifying, or if it's just a yes or no verification. Maybe there's a proper moment in the year where you verify without having errors. Maybe it's winter, and then you verify, oh, they are doing this, and maybe you don't care about the rest of the year. So it depends on what you are trying to verify, but for sure it must be not a claim. The claim it's general. It's like we are doing no-till for during the whole year, whenever it's needed.
Right, and but I think the thing that brought him there was just essentially that a no-till claim boils down to it's almost like we have verified that as far as this algorithm goes, we cannot find any evidence that the residue cover dropped below some level.
That's
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
That sounds right.
Exactly.
It's yeah.
So you will be targeting your analysis and all the algorithms involved to analyze the moment of the year where in that place of the earth till could happen, if there is still. So maybe you don't analyze the whole time series for the whole year. You can target it, and that will depend on the algorithm, the region, if you're in the tropics, if you're in South America, in the climate and everything, right? So it changed.
Sorry. So what I was saying before is that a no-till claim would it would actually be like a residue like claim like that.
We were just basically we were just saying that actually from the science perspective, you wouldn't be making like claims on single images like that. You would be running a algorithm over a time series of data that you would need to reference, and you would still be making a single claim that basically says, over this period of time, according to this algorithm running this data set, we could find no evidence that the ground cover dropped beneath this, level, which we then correlate with, proving that tillage didn't happen or supporting that tillage didn't happen.
So you'd basically say something like that. There's for this time frame. I mean, I think the sense I'm getting is it still is accurate to say that each image is analyzed. It's just that you're only reporting the aggregate.
Right. We report it. We report whether or not tillage happened in, if you take North America, you're talking that people till in the fall or in the spring. So we can report on either that sort of seasonal granularity or just on the annual granularity of, okay, we saw no evidence of tillage during the, during the entire crop year, which of course is, skewed and doesn't line up with the calendar necessarily. Harvest to harvest is something we typically use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it seems unlikely at this stage to be necessary to I mean we could be building processing pipelines that essentially sign each each result pre-aggregate, which is kind of what
Not sure.
Matthias has been working on, essentially.
Well,
Or
he hasn't been working on that really. He hasn't started working on anything like that. But
okay, so but I guess I'm just what I'm taking in is that's overkill. It's like there has to be you know,
just need the
want to
final
sign
result,
at the end.
and so then you need to just basically structure a claim that has the structure of like over this period of time. So the difference would be that it's like
it could be like a rule of decision, Aaron. So if you have like 10,000 pixels showing you that consistently in 10 months you haven't find any drop in certain index that it's attached to a no-till, but then you have like 3 pixels in those pixels that show you something different, then you apply statistics and you say, well, so the algorithm is when we say algorithms, it's like you have small algorithms for each thing, and then like a larger model, a model that puts all that pieces together, and so you have the final verification, which is based on main like a zonal statistics on that parcel related with, so you're just putting away all the noise or the border errors in the pixels, so you are sure statistically you won't.
Yeah, right. So even if you see like a drop in one individual image, statistically it's not significant.
No,
Yeah.
I wouldn't use one.
Okay,
and of course that each piece of the earth will have its own algorithms integrating in order to verify for that land with that climate, with that soil types. In some places, climate will be a variable that it needs to be more accounted, and in other places, the time periods for verification will change. So that's why the algorithms must be built on a base of regionality. Yeah.
Yeah. So effectively, though, we're saying that like the way that we need to have a special sort of type of claim that applies to that period, which says that the result of the analysis doesn't indicate that there was any tilling, and maybe there's some number of like the minimum amount of coverage that we can confidently say, you know, it didn't drop below this number.
Yes.
So anyway, I think we need to do for that we need to go into a bit of more like specific design, that maybe that would be something for you and Ethan to sort of, or you and Ian to kind of, or other people that are looking at these things to kind of come up with the common vocabulary. But once we have this vocabulary of claims, the idea is that in this SDK that Regen would provide, Dagon could be running that on their side, and there would be somewhere that they have a key that signs a claim in that format, and then they could deliver that, you know, signed, you know, document directly to the person requesting it. They could submit a transaction to the blockchain that had the hash and maybe the signatures of the claim. They could even submit the full claim to the blockchain. And then the person on the other side who is receiving the claim, if they're doing a blockchain contract, that would be something that they're doing with their incentive, no-till incentive program. And on the blockchain, basically the blockchain contract software would search for claims that had been stored on the blockchain at the time, like at the time when it needed to be submitted. And that's where they would intersect those two pieces, just to kind of bring things back to that initial question, how things would interact. I don't know if that's helpful, kind of in just tying this all together and providing a map. Paul or anybody else?
I think so. Sorry, I got cut out there for a second, but I was gonna ask like a clarifying question of an example of where you might want to sign multiple steps like with the satellite imaging, maybe you don't need to sign every algorithm, but and I don't know if this is realistic or not, but if you have somebody on the ground that's going and doing a soil sample in a parcel, then you might want to sign like that person did it and that they sent it to this lab and that this lab ran it on this machine with this, that's where it's like more necessary to sign all those steps. Is that a better example maybe of when?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely if there's somebody that's like a field verifier that's going out there, you would want to sign like their individual reports probably. And I think that that's actually sort of the more common use case that I think we've been imagining, like that probably for the remote sensing lab, that's more, maybe we just trust the entity, although we do have the idea that even within remote sensing, there's a way that it's done in a decentralized way. But I think for field reporters, the idea is we want to scale this into regions where there's not as much of like a network of trusted kind of field agents. And maybe there's some peer-to-peer reporting or something.
Right, we want to solve the last mile data problem here, which we can make significant gains by having, RSI, LAN, PKS, whatever it is, generating signatures and pushing data up into the algorithms and models and, claims. So definitely, I think you do want a fair amount of regularity around claims in a chain like that. And the higher the density of signatures, in a chain moving, so that every time that data is, something is happening, sample, you just decrease the risk associated with the, it's easier to validate the quality of the data, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess for the other end, like that, the field data signatures makes total sense. And especially if you're going and doing, wet lab stuff. And I think the thing that it is the analogy for the remote sensing data side is having, your versions of algorithms signed such that, when you say, all right, we're making this claim that Optus verifies this is a no-till field, it's not just Optus, it's this version of Optus on this date and time. Yeah. So
exactly.
even if it's not a completely open algorithm, it's like, well, this version does this, and it can be inspected if necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It could be, and also I think it could be open to be verified by multiple algorithms. Maybe you have more locally developed algorithms from local research groups, and you have more regional algorithms that, like the one from Optis, and then you can, have the final conclusion based on the on diverse
correlation, like
yes.
Optus and University of Maryland's algorithms both said the same thing, and that's enough to issue the Chesapeake Bay, whatever, like.
So just be clear in the rules of decision. That's what we need to build.
So I mean, another way of approaching that, which is the one that I had been posing a while back, is that we use remote sensing verification to reduce the in-field workflow by some large percentage, but in-field verification would still be used in cases where the remote sensing verification doesn't have like a strong conclusion, or the person on the ground strongly disagrees with it. So I think that like the actual workflow that we probably want to have is that the first claim is the land steward themselves submitting the claim. I'm saying, I'm claiming I didn't do tillage. And then we do remote sensing verification. And if there's like a high confidence, then it just goes through. If there's a low confidence, then somebody goes to the field and checks it.
And also,
maybe the land
there's a way to
get required to keep photos. And there's also, and the other thing is there's also a randomization step in there that like, even if there's successful verifications, maybe we still randomly audit 10% or 2% or whatever.
Yes, I assume if we get a high quality of the accuracy of the algorithms, at least, or if we have in the map the areas where we can be really confident about it. For some areas we will, so that it could not be random, Aaron. Maybe it's not random. Maybe you direct it to the areas where you have like a lower confidence of how the algorithms are working. And I would also make both. Yes, or both. And I will also allow this new data that people would need to verify to be able to flow up into feeding the algorithms. So also newer and more accurate algorithms can be fed by this information. I don't know if that's possible, or it could be like a way of offering so people, once they verify by soil sampling or with some kind of inspection or something, we or whatever is the company, organization, or research group building the algos, they can pull that information to build the algos for that area.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. And I think that
of data up and down.
Yeah, I think that's the idea, and I think
so.
Yeah, I think that's the idea that you would have, like, one of that motivations maybe with like random sampling is that, like, say for instance you do have a pretty high confidence, you still want to have some actual field samples, especially if you get to things like carbon measurement. Like maybe no-till is pretty obvious, but you know, you always want to have probably some connection to on the ground data so that you can do calibration and whatnot. I mean, this is where there's a lot more detailed design that comes in. I think one direction is the actual design of like a verification protocol that includes remote sensing plus on the ground data. The other is like, how do we design the data to enable that, and the software SDK part of it. So there's like two sort of separate, I think, design groups that need to kind of form out it.
Yeah, and I want to just we don't have a lot of time left, and I mean I think we've been sort of like we've been describing our perception of the needs for essentially a functional ecosystem service marketplace from the science and data architecture side of things. I think we have a lot of good thinking about that. I think we're well on our way to designing the bones of that, but I want to just like set that aside for a second, and it's very pragmatic. I think the needs for digital signatures, like that's the highest expression of what it makes possible, but there's also these like shorter term, just like what does that SDK actually need to look like in a minimum viable way, and what are the first things that we would be signing right now that would be useful for, Dagon, for instance, or like what might be useful to be like, hey, let's build an SDK so that you can be signing stuff like Optus results. Who's actually gonna be imbibing that signed result? What are the attributes that are gonna make it valuable? I think we can just sort of like zoom from the big picture back down into the particulars, and we can do that with satellite, like remote sensing stuff. And I think we could also obviously be thinking about this. There's a robust and fun conversation with RSI, which is sort of more like the tech that an auditor would be using to go do a sampling and like pass it up. And I also think like FarmOS, data being provided from farmers to train algorithms or to increase the quality of things is going to have to be signed, and then revocable keys given for people to use it to train algorithms or to provide verification or whatnot. So there's sort of like these three different distinct use cases, and we need to build sort of the SDK tools for each of them, right? And do so in a way that is as universally applicable as possible, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the task at hand. I'm curious, Aaron, what you think would be really useful in terms of engaging each team to get information from them about exactly sort of like where in their process signatures are going to be taking place. And, you know, if we want to, like, next week at this time, dig further into that, or if it's better to have one-on-one conversations, or just like, what does it look like to be, you know, servicing this and kind of moving it forward?
So I think there's a bit of that, which is on our end of just organizing around how we're going to lead this effort. And I think it comes down to like making sure that we have like a field team internally paying attention to this, and that we have clear, like, you know, OKRs tied to, you know, our larger vision. So I think that's just a step we need to take care of internally. I think that within that, I've been thinking the way that makes sense is to have somebody do like interviews with each group and collect requirements, and then try to narrow down on some requirements for like an MVP sort of thing, and just get some very small things into the development backlog. I've been thinking Daniel might be a good person to do some of that, but it could be that it's, you know, other people. Maybe you're having some conversations with some people, Gregory, or maybe Ron. But I have talked about Daniel with it a bit, like about Daniel doing some of that, and maybe he creates sort of like, we define what the right questions are, and he does kind of a little interview and collects notes with each participant, and then we do a cycle of design and present sort of like our MVP sort of like development steps, and check those with each group, and then sort of those go into our backlog.
Yeah. And I guess I have to go, but it was a good conversation, and it definitely helped me see how down the road here, I can better see how it would tie in, you know, Optus and DNDC results into the actual ledger-based contracts. So
Cool.
it's very good to talk to you guys again. And it sounds like you've got a next brainstorming thing to do.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
It doesn't involve me, really.
Yeah, well, we'll be in touch, and maybe be asking if we can hop on a 30-minute or hour-long, like dedicated sort of like user interview, so that we're understanding what exactly, like if we're building this open SDK for digital signatures, what it looks like to integrate. And we'll do that with each of you, essentially. Paul, we'll do the same thing.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right.
All right, thanks, Ian.
Take care,
everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Nice to
Have a good one.
Bye.
Nice to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.